Ubaba umntanami wokuqala umuntu oprethendayo kahle kahle, so mangaphuza hayi isandla sakhe sibalula, kodwa ngamyeka but ngathola omunye ofana naye futhi ngathi yena beka worse because bekadla nama drugs.
Dile hanyane kilabona hanyane motho aibo be di rules ukilabona bese ente go motho ha sa o tshela ka bleach kilabona e ya bana what you call o kenya ditami bona ntho e etsang o bleachang ya ditami tsa bana, so anqala o tshela kona go mahlong.
It started immediately as we started living together. As soon as we started living together, the abuse started. But then, you know, when you're in love, yeah, you even ignore the red flags, because my abuse at first, it wasn't physical at all. It was verbal, only when he's drunk. And we'll always blame it on the alcohol.
In this Women Month, we bring you a special focus on the ongoing crisis of gender-based violence in South Africa. Through survivor stories and expert insights, we explore the impact and efforts to combat this national scourge. We also look at the psychological impacts on victims. And for more on this, let's now unpack the scourge with our panelists. We have Lisa Vetten, a research associate at Wits University, and she joins us now via our video link. We also then have Dr. Kosi Giane, a clinical psychologist, and also Khomotso Mopulane, who is from the Sonke Gender Justice. Ladies, good evening to you here on The Full View on SABC News. Thank you so much for your time this evening.
Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you.
Let's start off with you, Lisa. Thank you so much for your time. I mean, just listening to some of those women that we spoke to just yesterday as The Full View, I'm sure it's not something, something that a number of women go through, but it's something very quite common when it comes to victims of gender-based violence. And it's a story that many people who are victims of gender-based violence can share.
I'm sorry, I don't know your story of yesterday.
No, we just played a clip a short while ago of 3 women, yes, who are unpacking some of the stories and some of the harrowing stories that they've experienced within abusive relationships. And I'm sure as somebody who studies, gender-based violence and violence against women, it's something that you've picked up on in your studies.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think domestic violence or violence at the hands of your intimate partner is the most common form of violence that South African women experience. And they experience it to a much greater degree than men do. And you can see this most starkly in the most serious form of domestic violence, which is an intimate femicide. And that at this point in time constitutes the bulk of women's murders. 60% of women who were murdered in 2021 were killed by their intimate partners. I mean, I think just to put that in perspective, the one year where we do have comparative data for the number of men killed by their intimate female partners is 2017. And in that year, 4% of men were killed by their female partners. So you can just see this very serious disproportionality that of this particular kind of violence that women experience. It's deeply entrenched. It's been normalized. I mean, we've come out of a history where up until 1993, it was not possible to charge a husband with the rape of his wife. It was because the law gave him particular marital privileges. So that's why we can say it has been normalized and it's come out of a background where it was acceptable. So I think trying to undo what have been centuries of highly discriminatory law that failed to recognize or refused to recognize what women experience, coupled with the kinds of economic dependency that it's created for many women on men, coupled to, more recently, as I think we've just heard on the news, a criminal justice system that is not doing well. And I know you're going to have guests who speak about the psychological impact of violence. I think we're left in a very difficult situation. You can see from some of our data that from about 2000 to about 2012, we were starting to turn a corner, especially in relation to women's murders and to rape. And I have to say, we've never had good data on domestic violence. But the last 5 to 8 years have seen a reversal of those gains and on multiple fronts. And for me, perhaps one of the most dramatic purely because there is data to support this, is the decline in the number of rape cases being put down for trial. So although the National Prosecuting Authority will tell you that they have a 75% conviction rate, what you need to take into account is that they are now putting down 3,000 fewer rape cases every year than they were doing in 2013. So I think we have to look very carefully at the successes that are apparently being achieved if we get a real picture of what is actually going on. And it's a very sobering picture. It's not one to, I think, cheer you up, because whatever politicians may say, far too much of our money is being spent on corruption, which is taking money out of the various programs and interventions that we need in order to be able to turn the corner on gender-based violence.
And Dr. Kosi, I'd like to bring you in now on this conversation. Maybe let's start off here, and if you can maybe give us the background of the mindset of a GBV perpetrator.
So by the time the person becomes an adult who then surrenders their sense of self to an adult, what is likely to have happened is that it is one of two scenarios that may actually be mutually reinforcing, in the sense that a person, it may start off as a trait vulnerability. In other words, perhaps due to some trauma that they will have experienced as part of their social learning, perhaps in their immediate environment in which they grow up, they will then develop without any ability or any resource that helps to integrate the self into a healthy sense of self, and healthy understanding of themselves, a self-respect and a sense of boundaries around themselves. And by the time they get into the age where they start interacting with the opposite gender or enter into, intimate relationships, there is that vulnerability, and also the societal norms, the socio-cultural and economic dynamics as well that render, people vulnerable to predatory relationships. Or sometimes it may be a state factor, in that perhaps at a certain point in time, due to a number of things, a person begins, to, as we heard from some of the interviews, it seemed like all was okay. And slowly it starts to creep in. And until little by little, their sense of self gets eroded to the point where they doubt themselves. They have lost their sense of being, their sense of value, feeling good about themselves and their agency, and will have surrendered that to someone else who will have, in one way or other, chipped away at it, such that there is very little of themselves, the internal psychological scaffolding that holds them together into an integrated, healthy sense of self that can stand on their own in that relationship.
And Khobotso, bringing you in now, just listening there to what Dr. Kosi is saying, where sometimes people are stripped of their dignity. What happens from the onset that it leads, to abusive situations in relationships that women from the likes of Sonke Gender Justice have spoken to? What leads to, behaviors of abuse in relationships?
Let me just say a correction. My name is Melise Jogiot from Women for Change. Well, what leads up to it mainly is the fact that, like the doctor said, the abuser usually comes from a trauma background, but the victim also is coming from the same place. And what usually happens is the two of them kind of come together because the one's trying to fix the other and the other one's trying to get more control. So the victims don't realize that they're being victimized in the situation because they come from a household usually where trauma and abuse is prevalent. And the only thing that they can then do is assimilate to the system the way that they have grown up and attune themselves to their abuser. For the most part, many people, in fact, don't even know that they're being abused, because you must remember, by the time the man or the perpetrator has physically abused her, there's already been emotional and physical, financial abuse prevalent in these relationships. Many of the women only realize much later that they've been abused throughout that time. And it's at that point when they have to make a decision whether they want to leave, which then in fact puts them in more danger, because by the time you want to leave, your abuser becomes violent, right? But there's a lot happening before they end up in these relationships. It's usually trauma related, and when there's no healing present and no communication or even education around what healing looks like, you're more likely to get involved in an abusive relationship if that is the family system that you grew up in.
Malise, we do apologize there for calling you by the incorrect name. But ladies, I'd just like for you to pause for a moment and let's listen to some of the stories that, some of these women have shared with us. And as part of Full View's Crime Focus for this week, we now shine a spotlight on the scourge of gender-based violence. And yesterday I spoke to 3 women who found refuge at shelters and have now since rebuilt their lives. Gender-based violence has been recognized by government as a national crisis and a second pandemic. Violence against women is widespread and manifests in intimate partner violence, while in some instances leads to femicide. The high rate of violence against women has led to many taking to the streets in protest against the scourge. Yesterday, the Full View visited the AmCare shelter in Alberton in Gauteng to hear the stories of some of these survivors firsthand. Mary, not her real name, is from Thokoza on Gauteng's East Rand. She talks of the abuse that she suffered for many years, not only from one intimate partner, but 2.
Ubaba umntanami wokuqala umuntu oprethendayo kahle kahle, so mangaphuza hayi isandla sakhe sibalula. Kodwa ngamiyeka, but ngathola omunye ofana naye futhi ngathi yena beka worse because bekadla nama drugs.
The 31-year-old woman says that staying in an abusive relationship landed her in hospital.
Bona lo uqala yena beka worse ngoba ngaze ngathola ititch. Ngayiswe esibhedlela ngayostitchwa ngendlela bekangilimaze ngakhona. Wathi mangitshela ukuthi uzongikhipha ilihlo. Ngathi hayi phela ngeke ngikhona kuzoba nelihle li1.
Mantwa Santi, originally from Kroonstad in the Free State, is another GBV survivor. She says she started noticing abusive behavioral patterns early in her relationship, but it was difficult to leave because she was not financially independent.
Iqadile hanyane hanyane. Kilabona hanyane hanyane motho aibo beya rules ukilabona. Bese ente go motho ha sa o tshela ka bleach. So anqala o tshela kona go mahlong. Ukilabona. So ya fela he ka no tla ba hantle. No, I pita hape ka no man, this is too much for now re ke nka tswela lena motho. And ntwe re bulang hape se se gore ha o sa sebetse monna sebetse o rona o tloa ka ile bana.
40-year-old Smangele Msani explains the patterns of her abuse in her relationship.
As soon as we started living together, the abuse started. But then, when you're in love, yeah, you even ignore the red flags, because my abuse at first, it wasn't physical at all. It was verbal, only when he's drunk.
Msani says, despite her partner changing his ways in an effort to convince her to stay, the abuse continued. She has also shared a very traumatic experience in her relationship, which gave her the courage to leave.
The final straw was when he beat me up in the morning when I was going to work. I had to leave the house naked because I was in the bathroom when he found me. While I was bathing, getting ready to go to work, I don't know what he had in his hands, but it was a metallic thing, because when it fell down on the floor, I had a 14-year-old son. He's the one who actually helped me. I had to grab a dress that was nearby and run naked in the street, and I never went back.
These women say they were fortunate to have found refuge at the AmCare shelter. The shelter can accommodate 20 women and provides a place of safety for them and their children.
Assist people that are in crisis, women that are in need of safety, women that some of them don't have family support, some of the women that are experiencing abuse by partners, or some by families as well, so they don't have support. Then this is a space where they will come, and it will be a safe space for them where they can rebuild themselves.
The women say they were able to rebuild their lives after the shelter took them in.
Ethemba bengasenalo sengibona kahle nje ukuthi hayi kusho ukuthi uNkulunkulu ungilethe emhlabeni ukuthi ngizolokhu ngishaywa amadoda because baba umntana oqala ngimshiyile, baba umntana wesi-2 wenza the same thing. Basise nasesontweni uNkulunkulu yonke into uzokunceda ngayo. Then because bekuyisikhathi se-lockdown besenza ama-activities la endlini, senza ama-crafts wezandla, sifundiswa i-computer, sifundiswa ukubheka, sifundiswa ukupheka, crochet and so forth. Si-type ama-CV wethu ukuthi mawuphuma phela kumele uzimele sibenzele abantwana bakho.
Amohelwa ke sisinayo social worker ya mo hae, and then mpha pleke ya ho dula le bana ba nkisa plekeng ya ho dula. Ke dutse mo hae mona handle ntla ho dula mo hae o dula more than 3 months. So ba bona boitshwaro ba hao gore motho a right a respectang ba iketsa matsatsi a hao, and then ba batlela bana ba ka sekolo ka mo, bana ba ka ba kena sekolo, ba o ruta lo pheya mo hae ntho ke ratang o sena skill sa ho pheya sa ho roka khona ho roka, ba o ruta go ska inyatsa ho motho wa mosadi even though sena mangolo o re ha ka ruteha.
It took me almost losing my life to see that this life doesn't matter. I can actually start building my own. It wasn't easy. It's never easy, but I had to decide whether I want to be in a coffin in a beautiful house or I want to have my life somewhere else, you know. So I chose my life.
For SABC News, I'm Bali Tatani in Alberton, Gauteng. And ladies, just listening to those women, just talking about their stories. And I just want to touch on just towards the end of that package. And Lisa, I want to come to you. Maybe if you can just let us know from your research, why is it that so many women find it difficult to leave abusive relationships?
It's very complicated. I think Marlie's alluded to some of those very deep emotional attachments. The thing with abusive men is that few of them are monsters all the time. And, when somebody is a mix of both good qualities and bad qualities, it's very hard to give up on them. Because you often think, well, maybe it's something I'm doing wrong. And if I can figure out what I'm doing wrong and change my behavior, then that will change his behavior. Or I think, we live in a society that also tells women, love will conquer all. If you just love a man enough, you can fix him. And it might take a long while before you reach the point where you give up hope. And I think what's also so really important, which all three women are in some ways talking about, is that when you reach that point where you're ready to leave, there's got to be help available to you. Because if it's not there, your fear of leaving might overcome you. The sheer difficulty of trying to make it on your own after years of having been emotionally abused and broken down and told how useless and pathetic you are and how you'll never make anything of yourself in the world. It's hard to overcome that very negative voice in your ear. And that's when you really need to have that help that will cheer you on and will encourage you.
Yeah.
If you have family, that's great, but many women don't have supportive family.
Certainly, and speaking to those women, a number of them also raising the issue around having a supportive structure. And Dr. Kosi, bringing you in now, do you think that when it comes to some women leaving, the issue around shame and, just being shamed in society for leaving your marital home to go back home, what role does that play in, the hindrance of some women deciding to stay in abusive relationships?
Yeah, I think we would be, amiss if we tried to simplify things, because I think the picture of every woman, we may see it on the surface as just one or the other, but it is a layered and complex situation that we need to understand. There will have been some foundation, perhaps historical foundation, that renders that vulnerability, which may then be compounded by a circumstance in which they find themselves at a certain time in their lives, some of which may be that, at home, their relationships, home doesn't feel like home, and this person becomes a refuge who then knows that this person has no other people, no other social capital, and they will reinforce their isolation from anybody else, such that they actually eat out of their hand. And when they start becoming abusive, as Lisa was saying, there is always that hot and cold kind of dynamic that they play out. So they kind of dangle the carrot even as they mete out the stick. And it creates this dynamic where there is self-doubt, there's ambiguity, there isn't any sense of certainty, and such that they never know which voice in themselves to trust. And it is a dance between the two, as Marlies was saying. You know, one where the man hopes she doesn't change. She becomes the puppet that he needs her to be, while the woman keeps hoping that he does change and becomes the one that she hopes he is capable of becoming. And so they lock into this dance, and it takes a lot. And importantly, it is very much important that there is a social capital that can help them to rebuild, but not only just rebuild, because for them to rebuild, they need to have some sort of faith in their own capability to rebuild their own lives, because by then this person will in some way have wired it into them that you are nothing without me. And so that script has to be flipped, and on their own generally they may want to, but sometimes that force or that voice is so strong that the voice that says you can has long been dumped down. And you'll find that even from their own homes, they never had been, motivated, inspired, encouraged, valued, listened to, heard, and validated in a manner that they could believe in themselves. And so when these predatory relationships begin, they find there is plenty of room with which to work. And it then becomes a very dependent relationship where he will, one way or other, strip her of any sense of her capability to stand on her own feet. And that is where the social capital becomes so important as a source of motivation, but also as a source of enablement, where there are resources, but also places where she can physically be removed from that environment, where she can begin to, restitch and rebuild her life one stitch at a time. The analogy or metaphor of crochet, it is one stitch at a time before you have a blanket that you can wear and feel warm around.
And Marlies, what role does Women for Change play in terms of trying to assist, these kind of women who are going through abuse in their relationships, to assist them to make sure that, there is a life after an abusive relationship?
So most of the work that we do predominantly is referral based. But when it comes to these particular abusive relationships where, like the doctor was saying, the identity is broken down within the relationship. So the only identity the woman has is based on her abuser. We have to physically walk them through the experience. One of the things you find in most of these cases when she wants to leave is that there is no support, because she comes from a family who's normalized abuse. So going back to that family means then that they have to accept that they've been in an abusive family system, and that's not tolerated in most of these families. So in recent weeks, what I've had to do, because I've been through the same experience, is walk through some of these women and just know that they are supported, help them identify who they are away from these relationships, and find some sense of self that is based and rooted in who they are as individuals and who they are as mothers. Because you must keep one thing in mind. Number one, the police don't necessarily help when it comes to the emotional well-being of the woman, and a lot of them get sent back when they try to open up cases. We get a lot of those on a daily basis. The second thing is the court doesn't understand how emotional and financial abuse works. So when you're going to court to get a protection order from your abuser, to try and get a system in place to help support you and your children, most times the abuser is the one who's believed and not the victim. And you have to learn things like not crying in court, because then you look like you're looking for attention, because the judge doesn't really understand that she's being emotionally abused. So we have to hold their hands through these processes. And there's very few of us, so it's very difficult to do it with a lot of women. But we have to hold their hands, because the support is the thing that helps the most. I have a friend who always says, you don't help someone with money when they're struggling. You help them by emotionally standing by them so they can find their own strength in order to move forward. And from someone who's experienced that, I've experienced homelessness because of my abuse, and had to learn that on my own without emotional support. You see the value of how supporting these women emotionally helps them get right back up on their feet where they need to be without their abuser's assistance.
And I want to bring you back in, Lisa. It seems as if, from all you three ladies, one thing that keeps on coming up is the issue around support structure. And just reminding me yesterday when I spoke to these women, a number of them were saying that it's very difficult to go back home because really there is no support structure. How important is some sort of support structure, Lisa, when someone is enduring abuse? If you can just wrap it up for us, please, in 30 seconds.
It's absolutely vital. You've lived with somebody who spent the entire time of your relationship telling you what rubbish you are. Support people who can tell you something different, that you are a valuable person, that you have abilities in the world, that you deserve a good life, are vital, because you've got to have that counter voice against the negativity you've been told that will encourage you and keep you going and help you to remember who you are and what you can still be capable of.
And coming back to you, Dr. Okosi, and just talking about, the impact of abuse and long term, what impact does that have on women who are trying to rebuild their life post-abuse?
I think the most important thing is developing that sense of belief in themselves and seeing themselves as a possibility, that it may not be easy, but it doesn't mean it's impossible, that they are worth the effort without this person, that they themselves have the agency to rewrite their own script, and they may not necessarily go back to the life that they may have had, which may include, some financial support and so on. However, that who they are, their self-worth, is far more important than the material, resources that this person will have used to buy them out of their own sense of self-worth, that who they are matters more than any material, things that they may have or may not have. And it is through that belief that they can begin to build a life that has the things that they need, maybe not necessarily everything that they want, but things that they need, that they can one day at a time rebuild on their own, with the support of people like Marlies, as she has eloquently, painted the picture for us.
And Marlies, coming back to you, I mean, speaking to these ladies, a number of them pointing out the issues around support, reporting these crimes to the police. Also, you touching on the fact that most of them saying that it's really quite difficult when you go and report these issues. And some police officials say that, well, this is a family problem. What needs to change, particularly when you are reporting a crime to the police, a crime of gender-based violence?
It's a training issue. I think one of the biggest issues we have in South Africa educationally is that we do not teach how gender-based violence actually functions. We focus so much on the physicality of it that we don't understand the emotional and mental impact that it has on the victim. And when you're trying to communicate that to the police, they have no understanding of what's happening, right? So they send the victims often back to the place that they're being abused, and she just has to do whatever it takes to survive that situation. We have a fundamental education problem in South Africa, and based on, you mentioned Olerato's case was mentioned earlier, with the men that actually murdered her, who were let out on bail, different courts and different police officers treat these cases differently. We need to have one way of dealing with all of this, but it needs to start from understanding the education aspect and the psychological aspect that it's having on the victim, so that when she's communicating key words in explaining her abuse, they know how to identify what is happening without assuming that it's a family matter. That is, I think, the biggest issue, but also because victims are re-traumatized in police stations because the cops that deal with them mainly are men and see this, the systemic abuse problem that we have in South Africa as normal, because we teach that in our culture.
All right, ladies, thank you so much for your time navigating this conversation. That is Lisa Vetten, a research associate at Wits University, Dr. Kosi Giane, a clinical psychologist, and Marlies Yohat, who is from Women for Change. She's an advocacy and operations manager. Thank you so much for your contributions to this conversation.